Look, I'm not the kind of guy who messes with the occult, never have been. Always figured that stuff was best left alone. But curiosity, as they say, killed the cat. Or in this case, almost killed me and my buddy Darnell. It all started with a Reddit thread. Late one night, scrolling through the creepy stuff, I stumbled across this post about the midnight game. Claimed it was an old pagan ritual, a way to summon some thing into your house. The rules were simple enough, but the warnings were pretty dire. Don't leave the house, don't turn on the lights, and whatever you do, don't let it catch you. Darnell, he's always been the daredevil of the two of us. When I showed him the post, he was all in. Man, that sounds messed up, he said, grinning. We gotta try it. I was hesitant, but Darnell can be persuasive. Plus, there was a part of me, a small stupid part, that thought it was all just a bunch of internet hooey. So, against my better judgment, I agreed. We gathered the supplies, a wooden door, a candle, a piece of paper, a pen, a pin, matches and salt. The instructions said to write your full name on the paper, prick your finger, and smear a drop of blood on it. Then, you knock on the door 22 times at exactly midnight, the last knock falling precisely as the clock strikes 12. You open the door, blow out the candle, step back inside, and close the door. That's when the game begins. We chose my place, a small 2-bedroom apartment on Elm Street in Manchester, New Hampshire. My apartment number is 3 billions if you're curious, though I don't recommend trying this yourself. We prepped everything, the tension thick in the air. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, my stomach churned with a mixture of excitement and dread. "Ready, man?" Darnell asked, a nervous edge to his voice. "As I'll ever be," I replied, trying to sound braver than I felt. At 11:59 p.m., we stood in front of my apartment door, the paper with our names and blood clutched in my hand. The candle flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls. My heart pounded in my chest. Then, the clock began to chime. Bong. Bong, ba bong. I started knocking. Knock, knock, knock. Each knock echoed in the silence, amplifying the tension. I counted under my breath, making sure to time the last knock perfectly. 20, 21, 22. The final chime of the clock coincided with the last knock. I took a deep breath, opened the door, blew out the candle, and stepped back inside. Darnell followed close behind. I slammed the door shut and leaned against it, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The apartment was plunged into darkness. The only sound was the frantic beating of my own heart. "Well," Darnell whispered, his voice shaky. "Now what?" That's when we heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from the other side of the door. The scratching continued, growing louder, more insistent. It sounded like fingernails dragging across wood. My blood ran cold. Darnell and I exchanged terrified glances in the darkness. "What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. I shook my head, unable to speak. I clutched the salt in my hand, remembering the instructions. If you felt threatened, you were supposed to pour a circle of salt around yourself for protection. The scratching stopped abruptly. A moment of silence hung in the air, thick and heavy. Then, we heard a low growl, emanating from just outside the door. It was a guttural, animalistic sound that sent shivers down my spine. Darnell grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "We messed up, man," he whispered. "We messed up bad." I wanted to tell him it was going to be okay, but the words wouldn't come. I knew, deep down, that we were in serious trouble. We stayed huddled against the door, listening intently. The growling continued, interspersed with periods of unsettling silence. Then, we heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps, pacing back and forth just outside the apartment. We held our breath, praying whatever was out there wouldn't break in. The footsteps continued for what felt like an eternity, then stopped. Another agonizing silence followed. Suddenly the doorknob began to turn. The doorknob rattled violently, as if someone was trying to force their way in. Darnell and I scrambled back, away from the door, our hearts pounding in our chests. I quickly poured a circle of salt around us, hoping it would offer some protection. The doorknob stopped turning. We waited, tense and terrified, listening for any sign of the ting outside. Then, we heard a whisper. A low, raspy whisper. Coming from just beyond the door. "Let me in," it hissed. The voice was chilling, devoid of any human warmth. It sent a wave of fear washing over me, so intense I thought I might pass out. "Don't say anything," I whispered to Darnell. "Don't make a sound." The whispering continued, growing louder, more insistent. "Let me in. Let me in. Let me in." The doorknob began to turn again, rattling even more violently than before. The door creaked and groaned under the pressure. I could feel the wood beginning to splinter. Suddenly, the whispering stopped. The rattling ceased. Silence descended upon the apartment once more. We waited, holding our breath, unsure of what to expect. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. Finally, as the first rays of dawn began to filter through the blinds, we dared to move. Cautiously, I approached the door and peered through the peephole. There was nothing there. The hallway was empty. I slowly opened the door, my heart still pounding in my chest. The hallway was deserted. There was no sign of whatever had been trying to get in. Darnell and I stumbled out into the hallway, blinking in the early morning light. We were exhausted, shaken, and terrified. We had survived the midnight game, but the experience had left us deeply scarred. We never spoke of it again. And to this day I still can't shake the memory of that chilling whisper, begging to be let in. Story 2. I've always been a light sleeper. The slightest noise can wake me. So, when I heard the scratching at my bedroom window in the middle of the night, I bolted upright in bed. I live in a rural area outside of Asheville, North Carolina. My address is 12 Oak Haven Lane, a small secluded house nestled in the woods. It's quiet, peaceful usually. But that night, something felt off. The scratching continued, a rhythmic scraping against the glass. I strained my ears, trying to identify the source. It sounded like claws, long, sharp claws. My heart began to race. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and dialed, my fingers trembling. But before I could even connect the call, the scratching stopped. I held my breath, listening intently. Silence. Just the gentle chirping of crickets outside. I slowly got out of bed and cautiously approached the window. I peered through the blinds, but saw nothing. The yard was empty, bathed in the pale moonlight. I must have imagined it, I thought. It was probably just a branch scraping against the glass. I tried to convince myself, but a nagging feeling of unease remained. I went back to bed, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside, sent shivers down my spine. I lay there, wide awake, until the first rays of dawn crept through the curtains. The next few nights were uneventful. I started to think I had just been overtired, my imagination running wild. But then, it happened again. I was asleep, dreaming of something I couldn't quite remember, when I was jolted awake by the same scratching sound. This time, it was louder, more insistent. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, aiming the beam towards the window. The scratching continued, relentless. I slowly approached the window, my hand trembling. I took a deep breath and yanked open the blinds. Nothing. The yard was empty. But then I saw it. A fleeting glimpse of something moving in the shadows at the edge of the woods. It was tall, slender, and hunched over. It moved with an unnatural gait, its limbs contorted at odd angles. I couldn't make out any details, but I knew instinctively that it wasn't human. A wave of terror washed over me. I stumbled back from the window, my breath catching in my throat. The scratching stopped. Silence descended upon the house once more. I stood there, frozen in fear, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. I stayed huddled in the corner of my room until the sun began to rise. Then, cautiously, I approached the window again. The yard was empty. There was no sign of whatever I had seen in the shadows. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a deer, I told myself, or a bear. Anything but what I knew deep down, it really was. I called the police, but they found nothing. They suggested it might have been a stray animal. I knew they didn't believe me. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I was crazy, but I wasn't crazy. I knew what I had seen. The following nights were filled with a constant gnawing fear. I barely slept. Every night, I would lie awake, listening for the scratching, dreading the moment I would see that thing dot again. Then, one night, I heard it. Not the scratching but something else. A low guttural growl, coming from just outside my window. It was the same sound I had heard in my dream, the night it all began. I knew it was back. I didn't look. I couldn't. I just huddled under the covers, my eyes squeezed shut, praying it would go away. The growling continued, growing louder, closer. Then, I heard a tapping at the window, a slow, deliberate tapping, as if something was knocking. I squeezed my eyes tighter, my body trembling uncontrollably. The tapping continued, insistent, relentless. Then, I heard the window creak open. I screamed. I don't remember what happened next. I blacked out. When I woke up, the sun was shining through the curtains. The window was closed. Everything seemed normal. But I knew it wasn't. I knew that thing was still out there, watching, waiting. And I knew with a chilling certainty that it would be back. Story 3. It was late, maybe 2 a.m. I was walking home from a friend's place in downtown Chicago. I live on W Ohio St, apartment 4D, and usually I'd take a cab, but I was feeling restless and needed the walk. The streets were mostly deserted, just the occasional passing car, and the hum of the city in the background. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, making the familiar streets seem somehow different. I was about halfway home, crossing under a pedestrian bridge near New Orleans St, when I saw him. He was standing on the other side of the street, under a flickering street light, just watching me. He was tall and thin, wearing a dark suit that seemed too big for him, and he was smiling. It wasn't a friendly smile, it was wide, almost unnatural, stretching his lips thin and revealing too much gum. It was the kind of smile that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I tried to ignore him, quickening my pace, but I could feel his eyes on me, following me as I walked. I glanced back over my shoulder and he was still there, still smiling. He hadn't moved. I started to walk faster, my heart pounding in my chest. I told myself it was nothing, just some creepy guy. But the unease in my stomach grew with each step. I turned the corner onto W Grand Ave, hoping to lose him. I glanced back again, and my blood ran cold. He was still there, on the other side of the street, still smiling. He was walking now, keeping pace with me, his smile never faltering. I broke into a run, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could hear my own ragged breaths echoing in the empty streets. I didn't dare look back, but I could feel his presence behind me, like a shadow clinging to my heels. I ran all the way to my apartment building, fumbling with my keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get them in the lock. I burst through the door and into the lobby, slamming it shut behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for air, my heart still racing. I peered through the glass of the front door, expecting to see him standing there, that awful smile plastered across his face. But he was gone. The street was empty. I went up to my apartment, locked the door, and turned on all the lights. I checked the windows, making sure they were locked. I felt like I was being watched, like he was still out there somewhere, waiting. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in bed, clutching a baseball bat, every creak of the building sending shivers down my spine. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind. That unsettling smile burned into my memory. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was all just a bad dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and lack of sleep. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was real. The memory of that smile was too vivid, too disturbing. I haven't seen him since, but I still think about him sometimes, especially when I'm walking home late at night. I always look over my shoulder, half expecting to see him standing there, in the shadows, that terrifying smile fixed on his face. And sometimes, when I'm alone in my apartment, I can almost feel his eyes on me, watching me from the darkness outside, waiting. Story 4. My grandfather, Silas, was a man of few words. He rarely spoke about his past, especially his time in the army. He'd served during the Cold War, stationed in West Germany, but the details were always vague, shrouded in a sort of quiet secrecy. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed, his mind wandering in and out of lucidity, that he finally shared a story that chilled me to the bone. A story about a classified experiment, whispered rumors he'd heard from a contact in Soviet intelligence. He called it the Russian sleep experiment. Silas coughed, a rattling sound in his chest. He gripped my hand, his grip surprisingly strong for a man so close to death. This is something they don't want you to know," he rasped, his voice weak and strained. "Something they tried to bury." He told me about a secret facility, hidden deep within the Siberian wilderness. A place where Soviet scientists conducted horrific experiments on political prisoners. One experiment in particular stood out. An experiment designed to test the limits of human endurance. An experiment to see what would happen if a person was deprived of sleep. For 15 days, he described a sealed chamber, filled with a stimulant gas to keep the subjects awake. Microphones and one-way mirrors allowed the researchers to observe their every move. The subjects, 5 political dissidents deemed expendable by the regime, were promised their freedom if they could endure the ordeal. A cruel lie, my grandfather believed. For the first few days the subjects exhibited predictable signs of sleep deprivation, irritability, paranoia, hallucinations. They paced the chamber, talked to themselves, whispered secrets they thought were hidden. The researchers listened, recorded, analyzed. By day 5, the whispers turned to screams. The subjects began to exhibit extreme psychological distress. They tore at their clothes, clawed at the walls, smeared their own feces on the observation windows. The stimulant gas, meant to keep them awake, seemed to be amplifying their descent into madness. One subject, a young woman named Irina, according to Silas's contact, began to sing, a haunting melody, filled with a chilling beauty that belied the horror of the situation. The others joined in, their voices a discordant chorus of madness. Then, the silence. For a full day the chamber remained eerily quiet. The researchers, growing increasingly uneasy, decided to breach the chamber on day 10. What they found inside was beyond their worst nightmares. The stimulant gas had apparently leaked, creating a toxic environment within the chamber. But the subjects, they weren't dead. Not in the traditional sense. They were changed. Their flesh had begun to rot, peeling away from their bodies in strips. Their eyes were wide, unblinking, staring into the void. And they were still awake. They had ripped open one of the other subjects, consuming his internal organs. When the soldiers entered, the remaining subjects attacked with a ferocity that defied their weakened state. They screamed, they clawed, they bit. They begged to be put back into the chamber, to be given more of the stimulant gas. They no longer wanted freedom. They only wanted sleep. The soldiers, horrified by what they saw, tried to subdue the subjects. It was a brutal struggle. One soldier was killed, his throat ripped out by one of the test subjects. Another was severely injured, his arm nearly torn from its socket. Eventually the subjects were restrained and sedated. But the sedation had no effect. They remained awake, their eyes wide open, staring blankly ahead. The researchers, realizing the horrific consequences of their experiment, tried to cover it up. The subjects were terminated, their bodies incinerated. The facility was shut down, its existence erased from official records. But the story, like a virus, spread through whispers and rumors. A chilling reminder of the dark side of human ambition, of the horrors that can be unleashed when the pursuit of knowledge crosses the line into madness. My grandfather finished his story, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a deep sadness. Don't ever forget this," he whispered. "They want you to forget, but you mustn't." He died a few hours later, and I, burdened by his story, have kept my promise. I haven't forgotten, and now, neither have you. Story 5. I work the night shift at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center in Los Angeles. It's usually pretty quiet, just the rhythmic beeping of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses talking in hushed tones. But one night, a few years back, something happened that I'll never forget. Something that still makes my blood run cold when I think about it. It was a slow night, thankfully. I was catching up on some paperwork at the nurses' station on the 4th floor, near room 412, when a call came in from security. They had a woman outside, disoriented, and claiming to be sick. They brought her up to the 4th floor, and that's when I first saw her. She was young, maybe early 20s, dressed in a simple white hospital gown. But it was her face. It was blank, utterly devoid of expression. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes were wide and unblinking, like a doll's eyes. She didn't speak, didn't react to anything around her, just stood there, motionless, with that unsettling, expressionless face. She just showed up outside, the security guard explained, a look of unease on his face. Wouldn't say a word, just stared at me with those eyes. We tried to get her to talk, to tell us her name, where she came from. But she remained silent, her gaze fixed on some distant point in the room. It was unnerving, to say the least. We decided to admit her for observation. We ran some tests, checked her vitals, but everything came back normal. Physically she was perfectly healthy. But there was something wrong, something deeply unsettling about her. We put her in a private room, room 417, and assigned a nurse to monitor her. A few hours later, the nurse came running out of the room, her face pale and her voice trembling. She's gone," she stammered. I just looked away for a second, and when I turned back, she was gone. The door was still locked, the window closed. "I don't understand." We searched the room, the entire floor, but there was no sign of her. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Later that night, we received a call from the ICU. A patient, a Mr. Henderson in room, had suddenly died. A massive heart attack, they said. Unexplained. He had been recovering well from surgery, and there was no indication of any prior heart problems. The next morning, another patient died, then another. All sudden, unexplained deaths. And each time witnesses reported seeing the expressionless woman standing near the patient's room shortly before they died. Panic began to spread through the hospital. Nurses and doctors whispered about the expressionless woman, calling her the angel of death. Some refused to work the night shift, terrified of encountering her. Security footage from the night she appeared showed her materializing. One moment the hallway was empty, the next, she was just there, as if she had stepped out of the shadows themselves. The hospital administration tried to downplay the incidents, claiming they were just a series of unfortunate coincidences. But we knew better. We had seen her. We had felt her presence, We knew that she was the cause of these deaths. Then, just as suddenly as she had appeared, she vanished. No more unexplained deaths, no more sightings. It was as if she had never existed. But I haven't forgotten. I still see her face in my nightmares, that blank expressionless stare. And sometimes, when I'm working late at night, I can almost feel her presence. A cold spot in the air, a whisper in the shadows. A reminder of the night the expressionless woman came to Cedar Sinai, and left a trail of death in her wake. Story 6. I thought it was just an internet creepypasta, a spooky story to scare kids. But then my niece, Lily, went missing, and everything changed. Lily was 8 years old, a bright, imaginative girl with a love for the outdoors. We lived in a small town in rural Pennsylvania near the Allegheny National Forest. Our address is 57 Hemlock Drive, a quiet street lined with old Victorian houses. Lily loved playing in the woods behind our house, building forts and imagining fantastical creatures. One afternoon she went out to play, as she always did. She told her mom she was going to build a new fort, a special one, just for her and her imaginary friends. She promised to be back before dinner. But she never came back. We searched for her, the whole town turned out to help. We combed the woods, calling her name, our voices hoarse with desperation. But there was no sign of her, no trace, as if she had vanished into thin air. The police investigated, of course. They treated it as a missing person case, but their efforts turned up nothing. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Hope began to dwindle. Then, a few months after Lily disappeared, a group of hikers found something in the woods. A small, crudely built fort made of branches and leaves. Inside the fort they found a drawing, a chilling drawing of a tall, thin figure in a black suit, with long, spindly arms and no face. Beneath the figure, in childish handwriting, were 2 words, Slender Man. My blood ran cold when I saw the drawing. I remembered Lily talking about a tall man she had seen in the woods. She said he was her friend, that he watched over her while she played. We thought it was just her imagination, a figment of her childish fantasies. But now I wasn't so sure. We showed the drawing to the police, but they dismissed it as a child's fantasy. They said there was no evidence of foul play, that Lily had probably wandered off and gotten lost. They closed the case, classifying it as a presumed drowning. But I refused to believe it. I knew deep down that something more sinister had happened. Something connected to that drawing, to thing Lily called the Slender Man. I started researching the Slender Man online, delving into the creepypastas, the online forums, the whispered rumors. I learned about the stories of other children who had disappeared, their disappearances linked to the Slender Man. Children who had drawn similar pictures, who had talked about a tall man in the woods. I became obsessed. I spent hours online searching for answers, for any clue that might lead me to Lily. I felt like I was going crazy, chasing a ghost, a figment of internet folklore. But I couldn't give up. I had to find her. I had to know what happened to her. I still search for her, even now, years later. I still hold on to the hope that she's out there somewhere. But the drawing, that chilling image of the Slender Man, haunts my dreams. A constant reminder of the day my niece vanished into the woods, and the terrifying possibility that she might have fallen victim to something not of this world. Story 7. I live in a quiet suburb outside of Austin, Texas. Nothing much ever happens here. It's the kind of place where you leave your doors unlocked, and your neighbors wave from their porches. That's why what happened that night was so unsettling. It was a cool autumn evening. I was home alone, reading a book in the living room, when I heard a knock at the door. I glanced at the clock on the mantelpiece. It was almost 11 p.m. A little late for visitors. I got up and went to the door, peering through the peephole. 2 children stood on the porch. A boy and a girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old. They were dressed in dark clothes, their faces pale in the dim porch light. And their eyes were completely black. No pupils, no irises, just solid black. I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about them felt wrong. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. "Can we come in?" the boy asked, his voice soft and strangely monotone. "We're cold and tired." I stared at them through the peephole, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't explain it, but I felt a strong sense of unease, a primal fear that seemed to emanate from those black eyes. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I can't let you in. It's late, and my parents aren't home." It was a lie, of course. I lived alone. But I couldn't bring myself to open the door. The children didn't move. They just stood there, staring at me with those unnerving black eyes. "Please," the girl said, her voice echoing her brother's monotone. "We just need to use your phone. Our car broke down, and we need to call our parents." I wanted to believe them. I wanted to help them. But the fear was too strong. "I'm sorry," I repeated, my voice firmer this time. "I can't help you. You should go to a neighbor's house." The boy's lips curled into a slight sneer, a disturbingly adult expression on his young face. "We've already tried the other houses," he said, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "No one will let us in. Why won't you let us in?" The girl stepped closer to the door, her black eyes boring into mine through the peephole. "We just want to come in," she whispered, her voice now laced with a chilling intensity. "We won't hurt you. We just need to come in." I stumbled back from the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt a wave of dizziness wash over me, a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread. I fumbled for my phone, dialing, my fingers trembling so badly I could barely press the buttons. There are 2 children at my door," I stammered into the phone, my voice barely a whisper. They have black eyes. I think something's wrong." The dispatcher on the other end tried to calm me down, asking for my address, assuring me that help was on the way. But I could barely hear her over the pounding of my heart. I kept my eyes fixed on the peephole, watching the children. They hadn't moved. They were still standing there, staring at me with those black, soulless eyes. Suddenly, the porch light flickered and went out, plunging the porch into darkness. I gasped, my breath catching in my throat. I couldn't see them anymore, but I could feel their presence, a cold spot in the air, a weight on my chest. Then, I heard the sirens. The police arrived a few minutes later, their flashing lights illuminating the street. I cautiously opened the door, peering out into the night. The porch was empty. The children were gone. The police searched the area, but found nothing. They said there were no reports of any children matching their description, no reports of a broken-down car. They suggested I might have been mistaken, that it was all just a prank. But I know what I saw. I saw those black eyes, felt that chilling presence. And I know, with a certainty that chills me to the bone, that those weren't ordinary children. And sometimes, late at night, when I hear a knock at the door, I can't help but wonder, are they back? Story: I've always suffered from sleep paralysis. It's a terrifying condition, where you wake up in the middle of the night, fully conscious, but unable to move or speak. It's like being trapped inside your own body, a living nightmare. And it's during these episodes that I see them, the shadow people. It started when I was a kid. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, in a creaky old farmhouse just outside of Saratoga Springs. The address was 22 Apple Blossom Lane, a place filled with more drafts than secrets, or so I thought. I'd wake up in the dead of night, paralyzed, and see dark figures lurking in the corners of my room. They were tall and slender, their features indistinct, like shadows cast by an unseen light. They would just stand there watching me, their presence filling me with a sense of dread. I told my parents, of course, but they dismissed it as nightmares. They said it was just my imagination, that I was having bad dreams. but I knew it was more than that. I could feel their presence, a cold, oppressive weight in the air. As I got older, the episodes continued. I learned to recognize the signs, the tingling sensation in my limbs, the feeling of pressure on my chest, the growing sense of fear. And then, they would appear. The shadow people. Sometimes they would just stand there, watching me. Other times they would move closer, their shadowy forms looming over me, their presence becoming almost suffocating. I would try to scream, to move, but my body wouldn't respond. I was trapped, helpless, at their mercy. One night, during a particularly vivid episode, one of the figures moved right up to my bed. I could feel its cold, ethereal presence inches from my face. It leaned in close, as if whispering something in my ear, but I couldn't hear any words. Just a low, guttural growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate deep within my bones. I squeezed my eyes shut, terrified, willing myself to wake up. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The pressure on my chest lifted. The tingling in my limbs subsided. I could move again. I could breathe. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding in my chest, drenched in a cold sweat. The room was dark and silent, except for the rhythmic ticking of the clock on my nightstand. I turned on the light, scanning the room, half expecting to see one of the shadow people lurking in the shadows. But the room was empty. I haven't seen them as often lately. The episodes have become less frequent, less intense. But I still get them sometimes. And when I do, I still see them. The shadow people. Lurking in the corners of my room, watching me from the darkness. I've tried to research sleep paralysis, to find a scientific explanation for what I see. But nothing I've read can fully explain the terror, the chilling presence of those shadowy figures. I've come to believe that they're more than just hallucinations, more than just figments of my imagination. I think there's something else, something that exists just beyond the veil of reality, something that preys on the vulnerable, on those trapped between the worlds of waking and sleep. And sometimes, when I'm lying in bed just on the verge of sleep, I can almost feel them watching me, waiting for me to drift off, to enter that twilight zone where they can once again visit me. Story 9. My uncle, Dr. Elias Thorne, wasn't a man who spoke much about his work. He was a physicist, specializing in theoretical particle research, always buried in books and equations. He worked for a private research facility somewhere in the Nevada desert, a place so secretive, I never even knew its name. He'd just disappear for weeks at a time, returning pale and exhausted, his eyes filled with a haunted look I couldn't quite decipher. It wasn't until after his death, while sorting through his belongings, that I discovered a hidden journal. A journal that detailed a terrifying experiment, one he called the Harbinger experiment. The journal began with a series of complex equations and diagrams, detailing a theoretical framework for interdimensional communication. It spoke of harnessing unknown energies, of opening a gateway to something else, something beyond our understanding. Then the entries shifted, becoming more personal, more frantic. He described the construction of a device, a massive antenna array built in the heart of the Nevada desert, designed to transmit and receive signals from elsewhere. He wrote of the initial tests, the static and interference, the growing sense of anticipation. Then, on July 17, 2003, the journal entry simply read, "Contact." The following entries were chaotic, filled with fragmented thoughts and cryptic messages. He wrote of a voice, a disembodied whisper that spoke in a language he couldn't understand, yet somehow comprehended. He described visions, flashes of alien landscapes, and bizarre, otherworldly creatures. He wrote of the growing fear among the research team, the realization that they had opened a door to something they couldn't control, something that was hostile. He described the increasing instability of the dimensional gateway, the fluctuations in energy, the growing sense of impending doom. He wrote of the evacuation of the facility, the desperate attempt to shut down the antenna array, to close the gateway before it was too late. The final entry in the journal was dated August 3, 2003. It was scrawled in a shaky hand, the ink blotched and smeared, as if written in haste and fear. "It's here," he wrote. "It's coming through, we can't stop it, God forgive us." That was the last entry. The journal ended abruptly. I never found out what happened to my uncle, or to the other members of the research team. The facility, according to official records, was abandoned after a series of unexplained accidents. The antenna array was dismantled, the site reclaimed by the desert. But the journal remains, a chilling testament to the dangers of unchecked ambition, of the horrors that can be unleashed when we tamper with forces beyond our comprehension. And sometimes, late at night, I can almost hear that disembodied whisper, echoing in the silence, a harbinger of something terrible, waiting just beyond the veil of reality. Story 10. I was researching online urban legends. You know, the kind of stuff that's creepy but mostly harmless. I stumbled across a forum thread discussing cursed images, pictures said to bring bad luck or even drive people mad. Most of it was typical internet fare, grainy photos and fabricated stories, but then someone mentioned smile.jpg, or smiling dog as it was sometimes called. The descriptions were vague, unsettling. People spoke of a husky-type dog, bathed in an unnatural light, its face contorted in a grotesque, almost human-like grin. They claimed the image caused seizures, nightmares, hallucinations. Some even claimed it led to suicide. I was skeptical, of course. I figured it was just another internet hoax, a creepy story designed to scare people. But curiosity got the better of me. I started searching for the image, digging deeper into the online forums and chat rooms. I found a link, buried deep within a hidden forum. A warning accompanied the link, urging people not to click, not to look. It claimed the image was cursed, that it could cause irreparable psychological harm. I hesitated. A part of me, a small rational part, told me to stop, to turn back. But the morbid curiosity was too strong. I clicked the link. The image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel, the anticipation building with each passing second. And then, it appeared. It was a JPEG image, as the name suggested. A low-resolution photo of a Siberian husky, its fur illuminated by an unnatural, almost fluorescent light. Its eyes were wide and staring, fixed on the viewer with an unsettling intensity. And its mouth. Its mouth was stretched into a wide, unnatural grin, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. The image wasn't inherently terrifying. It was more disturbing, unsettling. It felt wrong somehow. Like looking at something that shouldn't exist. I stared at the image for a few seconds, a strange feeling of unease washing over me. Then, I closed the window, quickly deleting the file from my computer. I tried to shake it off, to dismiss it as just another creepy internet image. But I couldn't. The image was burned into my mind, that grotesque smile haunting my thoughts. That night, I had nightmares. Vivid, disturbing dreams of the smiling dog, its eyes following me, its grin widening with each passing moment. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The nightmares continued for weeks. I started seeing the dog in my peripheral vision, fleeting glimpses of that unsettling grin. I became paranoid, jumpy, constantly looking over my shoulder. I tried to talk to someone about it, to explain what I was experiencing, but no one believed me. They said it was just stress, that I was working too hard. They told me to forget about it, to move on. But I couldn't. The image, the smile, was always there, lurking in the back of my mind. A constant reminder of the day I clicked that link, the day I unleashed something terrible into my life. I haven't seen the image since that day. I've avoided any mention of it online, terrified of seeing that smile again. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see it. That grotesque, unnatural grin, haunting me, mocking me, reminding me of the day I looked into the eyes of the smiling dog. And I know, with a chilling certainty, that it's still out there, waiting. Story 11. I was never a big Pokemon fan. My younger brother Owen was obsessed though. He had every game, every card, every piece of merchandise imaginable. He was particularly fond of Pokemon Red and Blue, the original games for the Game Boy. He would spend hours playing, exploring the virtual world, catching and training his digital creatures. He was especially fond of a particular town in the game, a place called Lavender Town. Lavender Town was different. It was a small, quiet town, home to a Pokemon graveyard. The music was slow, melancholic, with a high-pitched, almost unsettling tone. Owen loved it. He would often leave his Game Boy on, just listening to the Lavender Town theme music. I remember thinking it was a bit creepy. The music, the atmosphere of the town. But Owen just shrugged it off. He said it was his favorite place in the game. Then, things started to get strange. Owen became withdrawn, irritable. He stopped playing Pokemon, stopped going outside. He would just sit in his room, staring blankly at the wall, his eyes glazed over. He complained of headaches, nausea, dizziness. He said he couldn't sleep, that he kept hearing the Lavender Town music in his head. Our parents took him to the doctor, of course. They ran tests, checked his vitals, but everything came back normal. They said it was probably just stress, that he was spending too much time playing video games. They told him to take a break, to get some fresh air. But it didn't help. Owen's condition worsened. He became increasingly agitated, paranoid. He started talking about seeing things, shadowy figures lurking in the corners of his room. He said they were whispering to him, calling his name. He started having nightmares, vivid, disturbing dreams of Lavender Town, of the Pokemon graveyard, of the high-pitched, unsettling music. He would wake up screaming, drenched in a cold sweat, his eyes wide with terror. One night, he woke up in the middle of the night, screaming and thrashing in his bed. Our parents rushed into his room, trying to calm him down. But he wouldn't stop screaming. He kept clawing at his ears, as if trying to block out a sound only he could hear. Then, he went silent. His body went limp. His eyes stared blankly at the ceiling. He was gone. The doctors said it was a sudden cardiac arrest, brought on by extreme stress and anxiety. They said there was nothing they could have done. But I knew better. I knew it was the music, the Lavender Town theme. I had read about it online, the rumors of a Lavender Town syndrome, a phenomenon where the game's music caused psychological distress, even death, in young children. I had dismissed it as just another internet creepypasta, a harmless urban legend, but now I wasn't so sure. I never played Pokemon again. I couldn't. The memory of Owen, of his descent into madness, of that haunting music, was too much. And sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I can almost hear it. That high-pitched, melancholic melody. A chilling reminder of the day my brother lost himself in the virtual world of Lavender Town, and never came back. Story 12. I've always been fascinated by liminal spaces. Those in-between places, the transitional zones that exist on the periphery of our everyday reality. Empty hallways, deserted parking lots, abandoned buildings, places that evoke a sense of unease, of something not quite right. I even ran a small blog dedicated to exploring and photographing these spaces. It was called The Liminal Lens. I never expected it would lead me to this. It started with an anonymous tip, a cryptic message in my blog's inbox, simply reading, Level 0, the back rooms. Find the way in. I was intrigued. I had never heard of the back rooms before. I did some digging online and found a few scattered references, mostly on obscure forums and image boards. The descriptions were vague, unsettling. People spoke of an endless maze of empty yellow-walled rooms stretching on for infinity. A place where reality glitched. I dismissed it as just another internet creepypasta, a fictional construct designed to unsettle and disturb. But the anonymous tip, the cryptic message, nagged at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I continued my research, delving deeper into the online rabbit hole. I found more references to the backrooms, more descriptions of the endless yellow maze. Some people claim to have accidentally stumbled into it, describing a sensation of no-clipping through reality, a sudden jarring transition from the familiar to the unknown. I found a video, a grainy, low-resolution clip supposedly filmed inside the backrooms. It showed a long, empty hallway, the walls a sickly yellow, the air thick with a sense of oppressive silence. The camera panned slowly down the hallway, the monotonous scenery stretching on for what seemed like forever. There was no sound, no movement, just the unsettling emptiness of the space. I watched the video, a growing sense of unease washing over me. It felt real, too real, like looking through a window into another dimension. I became obsessed. I spent hours online, searching for more information, more evidence. I started visiting liminal spaces, hoping to find a way in, to experience the backrooms for myself. Then, one night, it happened. I was exploring an abandoned office building in downtown Los Angeles, a place I had visited many times before. The building was empty, silent, the air thick with dust and decay. I was walking down a long, dimly lit hallway when I felt a sudden shift, a jarring sensation, as if the world around me had skipped a beat. The hallway stretched on before me, endless, monotonous. The walls were a sickly yellow, the air thick with a heavy, oppressive silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh flickering glow on the empty space. I recognized it instantly, the back rooms. I tried to turn back to retrace my steps, but the hallway stretched on endlessly in both directions. There was no escape. I was trapped. I've been wandering these empty yellow halls for what feels like an eternity. The silence is deafening, broken only by the occasional hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant echoing drip of water. I've seen things in the shadows, fleeting glimpses of something moving just beyond my field of vision. I don't know what they are, but I know they're not human. I'm lost, alone, trapped in this endless, monotonous maze, and I know with a chilling certainty that I'll never find my way back. If you're reading this, if you've stumbled across my blog, please be careful. Avoid liminal spaces. Don't look for the back rooms, because if you find it, you may never escape. Story 13. I stumbled upon the SCP Foundation by accident. I was researching government conspiracies online, deep down the rabbit hole of classified documents and redacted reports, when I found a link. A broken link, leading to a page that no longer existed. But the URL, it intrigued me. I'd never heard of the SCP Foundation before. I tried searching for it, but found nothing on mainstream search engines. Just a few cryptic references on obscure forums and hidden wikis. People spoke of a secret organization dedicated to containing and studying anomalous objects, entities, and phenomena. They called them SCPs. I was skeptical, of course. I figured it was just another internet hoax, a fictional construct designed to entertain and unsettle. But the broken link, the cryptic references, nagged at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I continued my research, using specialized search engines and navigating the dark corners of the internet. I found more references to the SCP Foundation, more descriptions of the anomalous objects and entities they supposedly contained. I found tales of monstrous creatures, reality-bending artifacts and phenomena that defied explanation. I found a document, a leaked file detailing the containment procedures for an object designated SCP. The document described a concrete sculpture, humanoid in form, with a disturbingly blank face. It claimed the sculpture was animate, capable of moving with incredible speed, but only when not observed directly. It warned that any lapse in visual contact could result in termination. I read the document, a chilling sense of unease washing over me. It felt real, too real. Like a glimpse into a world hidden just beneath the surface of our everyday reality. I became obsessed. I spent hours online, delving deeper into the SCP Foundation's hidden archives. I read countless documents, each one more disturbing than the last. I learned about SCP-096, the Shy Guy, a humanoid creature that would relentlessly hunt down and kill anyone who viewed its face. I learned about SCP-682, a reptilian monster virtually indestructible, driven by an insatiable hatred for all life. I learned about SCP-049, the Plague Doctor, a humanoid entity that believed it was curing humanity of a terrible disease, a disease that only it could perceive. The more I learned, the more disturbed I became. The world depicted in these documents was a terrifying place, a world where the laws of physics and reality were constantly being broken, where monstrous creatures and reality-bending artifacts lurked just beyond the veil of our perception. I began to question my own sanity. Was this real? Or was I losing my mind, succumbing to the allure of a fictional construct? Then, one night, I received a message. A private message, from an anonymous account, simply reading, "We are watching. Cease your investigation." The message chilled me to the bone. It confirmed my suspicions. The SCP Foundation was real. And they were aware of my curiosity. I haven't accessed their archives since. I have deleted all traces of my research, terrified of what they might do. But I haven't forgotten. I can't forget. The knowledge is there, lurking in the back of my mind, a constant reminder of the hidden world, the terrifying reality of the SCP Foundation. And sometimes, late at night, I can almost feel them watching me. Waiting. Story 14. I work as a counselor at an elementary school just outside of Denver, Colorado. It's a rewarding job mostly, helping kids navigate the challenges of growing up, offering guidance and support. But sometimes, we encounter things that are disturbing, things that shake us to our core. The Momo Challenge was one of those things. It started with whispers among the students. Talk of a creepy online challenge, a game involving a disturbing image of a woman with grotesque features and bulging eyes. They called her Momo. At first I dismissed it as just another internet trend, a harmless, albeit creepy meme. But then, the whispers turned into reports. Students started exhibiting strange behavior, becoming withdrawn, anxious, even aggressive. Some reported having nightmares, vivid, disturbing dreams of Momo. I started investigating, talking to the students, trying to understand what was going on. They described receiving messages on WhatsApp and other social media platforms. Messages from an account claiming to be Momo. The messages contained threats, instructions to perform dangerous tasks, even threats of self-harm. I contacted the school administration, the parents, the local police. We tried to block the Momo accounts, to warn the students about the dangers of online challenges, but it was like trying to contain a virus. The Momo Challenge spread rapidly, infecting the minds of young children, preying on their fears and insecurities. One student, a sweet, quiet girl named Emily, started exhibiting extreme anxiety. She refused to go to school, refused to leave her room. She said Momo was watching her, that she was everywhere. She started having panic attacks, hyperventilating, screaming in terror. Her parents took her to the hospital, where she was diagnosed with acute stress disorder. The doctors said it was likely triggered by the Momo challenge, by the constant threats and psychological manipulation. The situation escalated. Reports of self-harm and even suicide attempts began to surface, linked to the Momo challenge. The media caught wind of the story, sensationalizing the events, fueling the hysteria. Parents were terrified, children were traumatized. The school implemented stricter internet safety protocols, increased counseling services, and organized parent information sessions. We tried to reassure the students, to help them understand that Momo wasn't real, that it was just a cruel online hoax. But the damage was done. The Momo challenge had left its mark, a scar on the collective psyche of the community. The hysteria eventually subsided. The Momo accounts were shut down, the online chatter faded away. But the memory remains. A chilling reminder of the dark side of the internet, of the dangers that lurk beneath the surface of our digital world. And sometimes, when I talk to students about online safety, I can still see the fear in their eyes. The fear of Momo, a fear that may never truly disappear. Story 15th. My friend Sarah has always been obsessed with the strange and unusual. Cryptids, urban legends, haunted places, she devoured it all. She was particularly fascinated by rituals, those strange, often nonsensical sets of instructions that supposedly allowed you to interact with the supernatural. She'd read about the elevator game online, a Korean ritual rumored to transport you to another dimension using a specific sequence of elevator button presses. She was convinced it was real. I, on the other hand, was skeptical. We lived in a high-rise apartment building in downtown Seattle, Washington. The address is 2200 Westlake Ave, a sleek modern building with 20 floors. It was the perfect place to try the elevator game, Sarah insisted. The rules were simple enough. You had to enter the elevator alone and press a specific sequence of floors, 4, 2, 6, 2, 10, 5. If done correctly, a woman would enter the elevator on the 5th floor. You were not supposed to speak to her. If you reached the 10th floor without interruption, you could exit the elevator into another dimension. A dark, empty world, with only a single window offering a glimpse back to our reality. To return, you had to repeat the elevator sequence in reverse. It sounded ridiculous, of course, but Sarah was determined. One night, after everyone else in the building had settled down, Sarah decided to try it. I reluctantly agreed to accompany her, waiting in the lobby while she rode the elevator. I watched the elevator indicator lights as she pressed the buttons, my heart pounding in my chest despite my skepticism. The elevator stopped on the 5th floor. I held my breath, watching the indicator light. The doors remained closed for a few moments, then slowly opened. No one entered. The doors closed and the elevator continued its ascent. 10. The elevator reached the 10th floor. The doors opened. I waited, expecting Sarah to step out, laughing at the absurdity of it all. But she didn't. The doors remained open, revealing the empty hallway on the 10th floor. I called out her name, my voice echoing in the empty lobby. No response. I stepped into the elevator, my heart racing. The buttons were unlit. The elevator was unresponsive. I frantically pressed the buttons, trying to get the elevator to move. Nothing. I was trapped. Then the lights flickered. The elevator began to move, slowly descending. It stopped on the 5th floor. The doors opened. A woman stood in the hallway. She was tall and slender, dressed in a long white dress. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and empty. She didn't speak. She just stared at me, her gaze cold and unsettling. I stumbled back into the elevator, slamming the door shut. I frantically pressed the buttons, trying to escape. The elevator began to move again, erratically, up and down, stopping at random floors. The lights flickered again, plunging the elevator into darkness. I screamed, my voice echoing in the confined space. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, The elevator stopped. The lights came back on. The doors opened. I was back in the lobby. Sarah was nowhere to be found. I searched for her, calling her name, but she was gone. Vanished without a trace. I never saw her again. I don't know what happened to Sarah. I don't know where the elevator took her. But I know, with a chilling certainty, that the elevator game is not a game. It's something else. Something dangerous. Something that can steal you away from reality and never let you return. Story 16. I have always had vivid dreams. Fantastical landscapes, bizarre creatures, impossible scenarios. My subconscious is a playground of the surreal. But one recurring dream, one that started when I was a child, has always been different, disturbing. It's the dream of the grinning man. He's always the same. Tall and thin, dressed in a dark suit, his face obscured by shadows. Except for his mouth. A wide, unnatural grin that stretches from ear to ear, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. He doesn't speak. He just grins. He appears in different settings, different scenarios. Sometimes, he's standing at the end of a long, dark hallway, his grin beckoning me closer. Other times he's lurking in the shadows of my bedroom, watching me sleep, his grin a silent, menacing presence. I always wake up from these dreams in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest, the image of his grin burned into my mind. As I got older, the dreams became less frequent, but they never completely stopped. And the grinning man's grin, it seemed to follow me into my waking life. I would see fleeting glimpses of him in the periphery of my vision, a flash of that unsettling grin in the shadows. I would hear whispers in the silence, the faint echo of his laughter in the dead of night. I started experiencing sleep paralysis, waking up in the middle of the night, unable to move or speak. And during these episodes I would see him, the grinning man, standing at the foot of my bed, his grin wide and menacing, his eyes burning into mine. I tried to rationalize it, to dismiss it as just a recurring nightmare, a manifestation of my anxieties. But the grinning man's presence felt real, too real. Like something more than just a dream. Then, one night, the dream changed. I was standing in a dark, empty room. The only light came from a single window, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. The grinning man stood before me, his grin wider than ever, his eyes glowing with an unnatural light. He reached out and touched my face, his fingers cold and clammy. I tried to scream, to pull away, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. He leaned in close, his grin inches from my face. I could feel his breath on my skin, cold and rancid. And then, he whispered something in my ear. A single word, spoken in a low, guttural voice that seemed to vibrate deep within my bones. Smile. I woke up with a gasp, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat up in bed, my body trembling uncontrollably. I reached up and touched my face, my fingers tracing the outline of my mouth. My lips were stretched into a wide, unnatural grin. I looked in the mirror and screamed. My reflection grinned back at me, its mouth stretched into a grotesque parody of a smile. The grinning man's smile. I haven't been able to stop smiling since. Story 17. I've always loved a good mystery. Cryptic puzzles, hidden clues, the thrill of the chase. It's all intoxicating. So, when I heard about Pale Luna, a supposedly cursed text-based adventure game from the early days of the internet, I was immediately intrigued. The legend surrounding Pale Luna was strange. People claimed the game contained hidden clues that led to real-world locations, uncovering a dark secret, a buried treasure, or something far more sinister. Some claimed the game was haunted, that it could drive players mad. I was skeptical, of course. I figured it was just another internet creepypasta, a harmless urban legend designed to entertain and unsettle. But the mystery of Pale Luna, the promise of a hidden secret, was too tempting to resist. I found a copy of the game online, downloaded it onto my old laptop, and started playing. The game was simple, rudimentary, text-based, with minimal graphics, like something out of the 1980s. The story revolved around a quest to find a hidden treasure, guided by cryptic clues and riddles. I played for hours, immersed in the game's world, deciphering the clues, following the trail of the hidden treasure. The clues became increasingly bizarre, the riddles more cryptic. They started referencing real-world locations, specific addresses and landmarks. One clue led me to a small park in my hometown of Portland, Oregon. The clue mentioned a specific tree, a large oak tree with a distinctive knot in its trunk. I went to the park, found the tree, and discovered a small wooden box buried beneath its roots. Inside the box was a key. A small, antique key with a strange symbol etched into its head. I returned to the game, inputting the symbol from the key. The game continued, the clues becoming even more cryptic, the locations more remote. I traveled to different states, following the trail of clues, uncovering more hidden objects, more pieces of the puzzle. The game started to consume me. I neglected my work, my friends, my family. I was obsessed, driven by the need to solve the mystery, to uncover the secret of Pale Luna. The final clue led me to a deserted warehouse on the outskirts of Las Vegas, Nevada. The clue mentioned a specific room, a room with a single boarded-up window. I found the warehouse, broke into the room, and discovered nothing. The room was empty, dusty, abandoned. I felt a wave of disappointment wash over me. It was all a hoax, I realized, an elaborate prank designed to waste my time and energy. Then, I heard a noise, a faint scratching sound, coming from behind the boarded-up window. I cautiously approached the window, peering through a crack in the boards. A pair of eyes stared back at me. Wide, black eyes, filled with an unsettling intelligence. The eyes of something not human. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned and ran, fleeing the warehouse. The image of those black eyes burned into my mind. I haven't played Pale Luna since. I deleted the game, destroyed the key, and tried to forget about the whole experience. But I can't. The memory of those black eyes, the chilling realization that I had stumbled upon something real, something dangerous, haunts me to this day. And sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I can almost hear that scratching sound. A chilling reminder of the secret of Pale Luna, and the terrible price of curiosity. Story 18. I've always been a huge Simpsons fan. Grew up watching the show, can quote entire episodes verbatim. I even collect Simpsons memorabilia, everything from action figures to vintage trading cards. So when I heard rumors of a lost episode, a creepy unaired episode called The Dead Bart, I was naturally intrigued. The rumors were strange. People claimed the episode was disturbing, unsettling, far darker than anything that had ever aired on the show. They spoke of unsettling animation, disturbing dialogue, and a deeply unsettling storyline involving Bart's death. I was skeptical, of course. I figured it was just another internet creepypasta, a morbid fan fiction designed to shock and disturb. But the idea of a lost Simpsons episode, a hidden piece of television history, was too tempting to resist. I started searching online, digging through forums and fan sites, looking for any information about this supposed lost episode. I found a few scattered references, cryptic messages, and whispered rumors. Some claimed the episode was real, that it had been accidentally leaked online, then quickly suppressed by Fox. I found a link, a download link hidden deep within a password-protected forum. The link was accompanied by a warning, urging people not to watch, not to download. It claimed the episode was cursed, that it could cause psychological distress. I hesitated. A part of me, a small, rational part, told me to stop, to turn back. But the morbid curiosity was too strong. I downloaded the file. The episode began normally enough, with the familiar Simpsons theme song and opening sequence. But something felt off. The animation was different, crueler. The colors were muted, the lines harsher, the characters' expressions unsettling. The episode revolved around a family trip to the Springfield Air Show. During the show, Bart, in a moment of reckless abandon, climbed onto the wing of a stunt plane. The plane took off, and Bart fell. The scene that followed was disturbing. The animation became grotesquely realistic, depicting Bart's fall in graphic detail. The sound of his bones breaking, the sickening thud as he hit the ground. It was horrifying. The rest of the episode was a blur of unsettling imagery and disturbing dialogue. The Simpsons family, grieving Bart's death, their faces contorted in expressions of anguish and despair. The funeral scene, with Bart's small white coffin. It was too much. I turned off the episode, my stomach churning, my mind reeling from what I had just witnessed. I deleted the file, scrubbed my hard drive, and tried to forget about the whole experience. But I can't. The images, the sounds, the sheer unsettling nature of the episode. It's all burned into my memory. A chilling reminder of the dark side of creativity, of the horrors that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most beloved childhood cartoons. And sometimes late at night, when the house is quiet, I can almost hear it. The faint echo of Bart's scream, a chilling reminder of the lost episode, the episode that should never have been made. Story 19. I remember Candle Cove. I know some people don't, say it never existed. But I remember it. I remember watching it as a kid, huddled in front of our old grainy television set, mesmerized by the strange, unsettling world of talking pirates and creepy puppets. It was a local access show, aired late at night, after the regular programming had ended. I don't remember what channel it was on, just that it always seemed to appear out of the static, like a phantom broadcast from another dimension. The show was different, low budget, with crudely made puppets and a bizarre, often nonsensical storyline. The characters were unsettling, their movements jerky and unnatural, their voices distorted and echoing. There was a pirate captain, a talking parrot, a creepy clown, and a cast of other strange, unsettling creatures. I remember one episode in particular. The pirate captain had captured a young girl, tied her to a mast, and was threatening to throw her overboard. The girl was crying, begging for mercy, her voice distorted and amplified, echoing through the television speakers. The pirate captain just laughed, his voice a raspy, distorted cackle that sent shivers down my spine. The parrot squawked, its voice a high-pitched electronic screech. "Polly want a cracker. Polly want a cracker." It repeated the phrase over and over, the sound growing louder, more distorted, until it was almost unbearable. The creepy clown appeared, its face painted in a grotesque, exaggerated smile. It started dancing around the captured girl, its movements jerky and unnatural, its laughter a high-pitched, unsettling giggle. I remember feeling scared, deeply scared. I wanted to turn off the television, to run away, but I couldn't. I was mesmerized, trapped by the strange, unsettling world of Candle Cove. Years later, as an adult, I started researching Candle Cove online, trying to find other people who remembered the show. I found a few scattered references, cryptic messages on obscure forums and message boards. People who, like me, remembered watching Candle Cove as children. They described the same unsettling characters, the same bizarre storylines, the same sense of unease and dread. But then, I found something else. Posts from people who claimed Candle Cove never existed. They said it was just a figment of our childhood imaginations, a collective hallucination brought on by sleep deprivation and late-night television static. I didn't believe them. I knew what I had seen. I knew Candle Cove was real. But the doubt lingered. Was it real? Or was it just a product of my childhood imagination? A phantom broadcast from the depths of my subconscious, I still don't know the answer, but sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet, I can almost hear it. The faint echo of the pirate captain's laughter, the parrot's screeching cry, the creepy clown's unsettling giggle. A chilling reminder of Candle Cove, the children's show that may or may not have existed. A show that continues to haunt my memories, blurring the lines between reality and imagination. Story 20. I've always been drawn to the macabre. Haunted houses, horror movies, true crime documentaries. The darker side of human experience has always fascinated me. So, when I heard about the No End House, a legendary haunted house attraction rumored to be genuinely terrifying, I knew I had to experience it for myself. The No End House was shrouded in mystery. Located somewhere on the outskirts of Baltimore, Maryland, its exact location was a closely guarded secret, passed around through whispered rumors and cryptic online messages. It was said to be a truly terrifying experience, a descent into madness and despair, with a $500 reward offered to anyone who could make it through all 9 rooms. I was skeptical, of course. I'd been to countless haunted houses, and none had ever truly scared me. I figured the No End House was just another elaborate hoax, a clever marketing ploy designed to attract thrill seekers. But the challenge, the promise of genuine terror, was too enticing to resist. After weeks of searching, I finally found it. A dilapidated Victorian mansion, hidden deep within a secluded wooded area. A single flickering light illuminated a sign above the front door. The No End House, enter if you dare. I stepped inside, my heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. The first few rooms were typical haunted house fare, jump scares, creepy props, actors in ghoulish costumes. I wasn't impressed. This was nothing I hadn't seen before. But as I progressed deeper into the house, the atmosphere shifted. The rooms became more unsettling, the scares more psychological. Disturbing imagery, disorienting sounds, and a growing sense of unease began to creep into my mind. One room was filled with mirrors, reflecting distorted images of myself, my face contorted in expressions of fear and paranoia. Another room was completely dark, filled with the whispers of unseen voices, whispering my name, taunting me, driving me to the edge of madness. By the time I reached the 9th room, I was terrified, genuinely terrified. The room was empty, except for a single chair placed in the center. I sat down, my body trembling, my mind reeling from the sensory overload of the previous rooms. Then, the walls began to melt. The reality around me distorted, shifting, transforming into a nightmarish landscape of grotesque shapes and unsettling colors. I felt a presence in the room, a cold, oppressive weight in the air. I could hear breathing, slow, ragged breaths, coming from just behind me. I turned around, and screamed. A figure stood behind me, its face obscured by shadows. It reached out and touched my face, its fingers cold and clammy. I tried to scream again, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare world. Then, everything went black. I woke up outside the house, lying on the ground, the morning sun shining in my face. I was disoriented, confused, my mind struggling to process the events of the previous night. I had made it through all 9 rooms. I had survived the No End House. But the experience had changed me. The line between reality and nightmare had blurred, and I knew with a chilling certainty that a part of me was still trapped inside that house, lost in the endless maze of terror and despair. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still feel it. The cold touch of that unseen figure, a chilling reminder of the No End House, and the terrible price of seeking the ultimate thrill. Story 21. We were young, dumb, and invincible. At least, that's what we thought. It was the summer after high school, and my friends and I, me, Marcus, and Tanya, decided to go camping in the Eerie National Forest in North Carolina. We'd heard stories, of course, local legends about strange creatures and unexplained phenomena, but we dismissed them as folklore, campfire tales to scare tourists. We were city kids, too sophisticated for such superstitions. We'd soon learn how wrong we were. We set up camp near a small secluded creek, the air thick with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told stories late into the night. Marcus, ever the storyteller, regaled us with a local legend he'd heard about a creature called the Goat Man, a half-man, half-goat monstrosity that roamed the woods, preying on unsuspecting campers. Tanya and I laughed it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease, the primal fear that stirred within me as Marcus described the Goat Man's gruesome exploits. Later that night, after Marcus and Tanya had drifted off to sleep, I lay awake, staring up at the starlit sky. The forest was silent, except for the crackling of the dying embers of the fire and the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. Then, I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping sound coming from the edge of the woods. I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest, straining my ears to identify the source of the sound. It sounded like hooves, cloven hooves, tapping against the hard-packed earth. I grabbed my flashlight, my hand trembling, and slowly shone the beam towards the edge of the woods. The tapping stopped. I scanned the trees, my heart racing, but saw nothing, just the dark, shadowy forms of the trees, swaying gently in the breeze. I told myself it was just an animal, a deer or a raccoon. But the tapping sound, the rhythmic precision of it, didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard before. The next morning, I told Marcus and Tanya about the tapping sound. They dismissed it as my imagination, the product of a campfire story and an overactive imagination. We packed up our camp and headed deeper into the forest, determined to make the most of our camping trip. As we hiked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something following us. I kept glancing over my shoulder, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. Then, we found it. A small clearing in the woods, and in the center of the clearing, a circle of cloven hoofprints, freshly imprinted in the soft earth. The hoofprints were large, too large for any deer or raccoon. They were the hoofprints of something else. Something bigger. We exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken fear hanging heavy in the air. We turned and ran, fleeing the clearing. The image of those hoofprints burned into our minds. We never spoke of the Goatman again. We packed up our gear and drove home, leaving the Uwharrie National Forest behind us. But the memory of that night, the tapping sound, the hoofprints in the clearing, it stayed with us. A chilling reminder of the things that lurk in the shadows, the creatures that roam the woods, waiting for unsuspecting prey. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still hear it. The faint rhythmic tapping of cloven hooves, a chilling reminder of Anansi's Goatman, and the night we encountered something not of this world. Story 22. My cousin Emily has always been fascinated by the occult. Seances, tarot cards, spirit boards. She's always dabbling in the mystical and the macabre. She'd recently become obsessed with a ritual she'd found online, a ritual called the staircase ritual. It was supposed to allow you to communicate with spirits, to travel to other dimensions, to experience the unknown. I was skeptical, of course. I'd always been a pragmatist, grounded in logic and reason. I dismissed Emily's fascination with the occult as harmless fun, a way to explore the mysteries of life without taking it too seriously. But the staircase ritual, the way Emily described it, was unsettling. The ritual involved sitting at the bottom of a staircase in complete darkness, focusing your mind on a specific question or desire. You had to repeat the question or desire over and over, visualizing it, feeling it, until something happened. Emily had tried the ritual several times, claiming to have experienced strange phenomena, flickering lights, disembodied whispers, even the sensation of being touched by unseen hands. She insisted it was real, that she was communicating with something. One night Emily convinced me to try the ritual with her. We sat at the bottom of the staircase in her old Victorian house, the air thick with the smell of dust and old wood. The house was silent, the only sound the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. We turned off the lights, plunging the staircase into complete darkness. Emily instructed me to close my eyes, to focus my mind on a specific question. I chose a simple question. What is the meaning of life? I repeated the question over and over, visualizing it, feeling it, trying to open myself to whatever might be out there. The silence deepened. The air grew heavy, oppressive. I felt a tingling sensation in my limbs, a pressure on my chest. I started to feel uneasy. Then I heard it. A faint whisper coming from the top of the stairs. I couldn't make out the words, but the voice, it sounded familiar. Like the voice of someone I knew, but couldn't quite place. The whispering grew louder, closer. I could feel a presence behind me, a cold, ethereal presence that sent shivers down my spine. I wanted to open my eyes, to turn around, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, trapped in the darkness. The whispering intensified, becoming a cacophony of voices, all speaking at once, overlapping, intertwining, until it was almost unbearable. I felt a hand on my shoulder, cold and clammy, gripping me tightly. I screamed. The lights flickered on. Emily was standing beside me, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "What happened?" she whispered, her voice trembling. I couldn't speak. I could only point to the top of the stairs. The staircase was empty, but the whispering continued. Faint, distant whispers, echoing in the silence, a chilling reminder of the something we had encountered in the darkness. I've never tried the staircase ritual again. I can't. The memory of that night, the whispering voices, the cold touch of that unseen hand, it's too much. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet, I can still hear them. The whispers, calling my name, beckoning me back to the darkness. Story 23. My name is Ezra, and I guess you could say I'm a bit of a techie. Always been fascinated by computers, the internet, all that. I work as a freelance IT consultant, mostly fixing computers for small businesses around Portland, Oregon. My apartment is near the waterfront, a small place above a bakery on SW Oak St. It's nothing fancy, but it's home. A few months back, I got a call from a new client, a Mr. Silas Blackwood. He owned a small antique shop tucked away in a quiet neighborhood near 30 NW 23rd PL. Seemed like a normal enough guy, a little eccentric maybe, with his long white hair and piercing blue eyes. He needed help setting up a new inventory system. Simple enough job, or so I thought. The first few visits were uneventful. I set up the software, showed him how to use it, all the usual stuff. But there was something off about the place. The air was always heavy, thick with the smell of dust and old wood, and the silence. It was unnerving, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. Mr. Blackwood was always polite, even offered me tea and biscuits, but he never spoke much. He just watched me work, his blue eyes following my every move. One afternoon, while I was working on his computer, I noticed a strange file tucked away in a hidden folder. It was labeled simply "Red Room." Curiosity got the better of me. I know I shouldn't have, but I clicked on it. The file opened to reveal a video. It was grainy, low resolution, but I could make out a dimly lit room. There was a figure in the center, bound and gagged. I felt the chill run down my spine. I quickly closed the file, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to leave, to run out of that shop and never look back. But something held me back. A morbid curiosity, I guess. I tried to act normal, to finish my work as if nothing had happened. But I couldn't shake the image of that video from my mind. Who was that person? What was happening in that room? The questions gnawed at me. Later that evening, back in my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about the video. I knew I should forget about it, but the curiosity was too strong. I fired up my laptop, did some digging. I found references to red rooms on the dark web, whispered rumors of live-streamed torture and worse. The more I learned, the more disturbed I became. The next day I went back to Mr. Blackwood's shop. I told myself I was just finishing up the job, but I knew the real reason I was there. I wanted answers. He wasn't there. The shop was empty, the door unlocked. I stepped inside, the familiar smell of dust and old wood filling my nostrils. I went to his computer, found the hidden folder. The Red Room file was gone. But there was another file, labeled Ezra. My name. My blood ran cold. I clicked on the file. It was another video. This time the room was clearer, the lighting better. And in the center of the room, bound and gagged, was me. A recording from my own apartment. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see Mr. Blackwood standing in the doorway, a chilling smile on his face. "Curious, aren't we, Ezra?" he said, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "Some things are best left unseen." I don't remember what happened next. I woke up in my apartment, tied to a chair. My laptop was open, displaying a live feed of myself. I could hear whispers coming from the speakers, distorted, inhuman whispers. I struggled against the ropes, but they were too tight. I knew then what Mr. Blackwood had planned for me. I was going to be the next victim in his sick game. I closed my eyes, waiting for the inevitable, but it never came. I heard a crash, the sound of breaking glass. Then voices. Shouting. The police. They had found me. They had saved me. Mr. Blackwood was gone. Vanished. They never found him. I'm safe now, physically at least. But the memories, the whispers, they still haunt me. I see his face in the shadows, hear his voice in the silence. I can't sleep. I can't work. I'm afraid to be alone. I know he's still out there somewhere, watching, waiting. And I know, deep down, that I'll never truly escape the Red Room whispers. They'll follow me. Story 24. I'm not what you'd call a movie buff. Never really been into Hollywood glitz and glamour. But I do have a soft spot for old classics, especially The Wizard of Oz. It's a childhood favorite. I've seen it countless times. So, when I landed a job archiving old film reels at a studio in Culver City, California, near the Sony Pictures Studios at 1202 W Washington BLVD, I was thrilled. It felt like stepping back in time. The studio was a sprawling complex, filled with dusty vaults and forgotten treasures. My job was simple. Catalog the reels, check for damage, and prepare them for digital transfer. Tedious work, but I loved it. One afternoon I came across a reel labeled Oz Outtakes. My heart skipped a beat. I'd always been fascinated by behind-the-scenes footage, the glimpses into the making of a movie. I loaded the reel onto a projector and dimmed the lights. The familiar black and white footage flickered to life. Scenes of Judy Garland and the other actors rehearsing, laughing, goofing around. It was magical. Then, I saw it. During a scene in the Munchkinland set, in the background hanging from a tree was a figure. It looked like a person, a munchkin. I rewound the film, played it again. There it was again, a small dark shape hanging from a branch. My stomach churned. I stopped the projector, my mind racing. Could it be the infamous hanging munchkin? The urban legend that claimed a disgruntled Munchkin actor had committed suicide on set, his body caught on film. I'd always dismissed it as a hoax, a trick of the light, a bird flying by, but seeing it with my own eyes, it was different. It was real. I couldn't shake the image from my mind. I spent the next few days researching, digging through old studio records, newspaper archives. I found nothing. No mention of a suicide. No reports of any accidents on the set of The Wizard of Oz. It was as if the incident had never happened, but I knew what I had seen. I decided to show the footage to my supervisor, a gruff old man named Earl. He'd been working at the studio for decades, seen it all. He watched the footage in silence, his face grim. When it was over, he sighed. "Opal," he said, his voice low, "some things are best left buried." He told me to forget about it, to destroy the real. He said it was just a studio prank, a dummy hung from a tree to scare the actors. But I didn't believe him. His eyes, they told a different story. A story of secrets and cover-ups, of a tragedy swept under the rug. I couldn't let it go. I made a copy of the reel, hid it away. I continued my research, determined to uncover the truth. I talked to old-timers, former studio employees, anyone who might have been around during the filming of The Wizard of Oz. I pieced together fragments of information, whispers and rumors. A story of a young actor, desperate for fame, driven to despair by the harsh realities of Hollywood. A story of a tragic end, a life cut short. I never found definitive proof. No official records, no eyewitness accounts. But I found enough to convince me that the legend was more than just a legend. It was a tragedy, a forgotten piece of Hollywood history. I still work at the studio, still archiving old films. But I'll never look at The Wizard of Oz the same way. Every time I see the Munchkins dancing, I remember the figure hanging from the tree. A silent reminder of a forgotten soul, a victim of the dark side of Hollywood dreams. And I keep the copy of the reel hidden away, a testament to a truth that no one wants to acknowledge. A truth that whispers in the shadows of the silver screen. Story 25. They called me Kip. Short for Kipling, a name my literature-loving mother bestowed upon me. I wasn't much for books myself, preferred tinkering with engines and riding my dirt bike. I lived in Fairfax County, Virginia, not far from Clifton, a quiet rural area, specifically near the Colchester Overpass, or as the locals called it, the Bunnyman Bridge, located near Guinea R&D, Clifton, VA. Now, every town has its local legends, spooky stories told around campfires to scare the kids. The Bunnyman was ours. A man in a rabbit suit who supposedly haunted the old railroad trestle, attacking anyone who dared to venture near it at night. Most folks dismissed it as a silly story, but there were always whispers, rumors of strange sightings, unexplained incidents. One Halloween night, my friends, Ricky and Darnell, decided to test the legend. They were a few years older than me, always trying to prove how brave they were. They dared me to come along, said I was too chicken. I wasn't about to let them call me chicken. So, I hopped on my dirt bike and followed them to the bridge. It was a cold, moonless night. The wind howled through the trees, making the old trestle creak and groan. We parked our bikes at the bottom of the embankment and started walking up towards the bridge. The air was thick with the smell of damp leaves and something metallic. Ricky and Darnell were laughing, joking, trying to act tough, but I could tell they were nervous. I was too. The closer we got to the bridge, the colder it felt. The darkness seemed to press in on us, suffocating us. We reached the bridge, the rusted metal cold beneath our feet. The wind whistled through the gaps in the tracks, sounding like a ghostly moan. We walked slowly, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. Suddenly Ricky stopped. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. We listened, a faint rustling sound, coming from the woods below. Then we saw it. A figure standing in the shadows. A tall, slender figure wearing a white rabbit suit. Its head was tilted, as if it was watching us. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. The figure took a step towards us, the moonlight glinting off something in its hand. An axe. We screamed. Ricky and Darnell turned and ran, scrambling back down the embankment. I hesitated, my legs frozen in fear. The bunny man raised the axe, and I knew I had to run. I turned and sprinted, my dirt bike the only thing on my mind. I could hear the bunny man behind me, its heavy footsteps echoing on the metal bridge. I reached my bike, fumbled with the keys, started the engine. I roared away, not stopping until I reached the safety of the main road. I never saw Ricky and Darnell again that night. They showed up the next morning, pale and shaken, claiming they'd gotten separated from me in the woods. They never mentioned the bunny man. Neither did I. We never went back to the bridge. But I'll never forget that night. I'll never forget the sight of that figure in the rabbit suit, the glint of the axe in the moonlight. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't just a story. The bunny man is real, and he's still out there, waiting in the shadows of the Colchester overpass, waiting for his next victim. Story 26: The occult, the paranormal, all that spooky stuff. My friends, they called me weird, but I didn't care. I loved the thrill of exploring the unknown. So, when I heard about the midnight game, I knew I had to try it. It was a ritual, a game supposedly used to summon a dark entity. Dangerous, they said. Deadly, even. But that just made it more appealing. I convinced my friend Bethany to join me. She was always up for an adventure, even if she was a bit more cautious than me. We found an abandoned farmhouse out in the countryside near Lancaster, Pennsylvania. A creepy old place with boarded-up windows and overgrown weeds. Perfect for our little experiment. The address we found online was Strasburg Pike, Lancaster, PA, though I'm not sure if that dilapidated building is still standing. We gathered the necessary materials: a candle, a wooden door, a piece of paper with our names written on it, a drop of our blood, and a pin. The instructions were specific, almost ritualistic. We had to perform the ritual at exactly midnight, knock on the door 22 times, the last knock falling precisely at 00 a.m. Then we had to open the door, blow out the candle, step back inside, and close the door. The game had begun. We followed the instructions to the letter. The air was thick with anticipation, a nervous energy crackling between us. As the clock struck 12, we knocked on the wooden door. 1, T2, T3. Each knock echoed through the silent house, amplifying the tension. T21, T22. The last knock fell exactly at midnight. We held our breath, listening. Silence. Then, a faint creak. The door slowly swung open, revealing the dark interior of the house. We blew out the candle, plunged into darkness. We stepped back inside, the door closing behind us with a soft click. The game had begun. We lit the candle again, our hands shaking. The instructions said we had to wander through the house until 3:33 a.m., avoiding the midnight man. If the candle flickered, it meant he was near. We had to relight it within 10 seconds, or face the consequences. We started exploring the house, each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of the wind sending shivers down our spines. The air was heavy, cold, with a strange metallic smell. We moved from room to room, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing peeling wallpaper, cobweb-draped furniture, and the remnants of a life long gone. Suddenly the candle flickered. We froze, our hearts pounding in our chests. We fumbled with the lighter, our hands shaking so badly we could barely hold it. The flame caught, the candle flickering back to life. We breathed a sigh of relief, but the fear remained. We knew he was near. We continued our exploration, the tension mounting with each passing minute. The candle flickered again, and again, each time a heart-stopping race against time to relight it. We could feel his presence, a cold, oppressive force that seemed to suck the air from our lungs. Finally, the clock struck 3:33 a.m. The game was over. We stumbled out of the house, gasping for breath, the morning light a welcome sight. We never saw the midnight man, but we felt him. His presence, his malice. We knew we had been lucky, we had survived, but the experience changed us. We never spoke of it again, but the memory lingers, a chilling reminder of the darkness that lurks just beyond the veil of reality. And sometimes, in the quiet of the night, I still hear the whispers, the faint echoes of the midnight man, calling my name.